3 days before the Sovereign Compact learned to fear humanity, a man named Pell spilled cold coffee on a navigation console and accidentally saved the human race. It was not dramatic. He reached for his thermos in the dark of the Gilmore's lower deck, knocked it sideways, and while cleaning the mess with his sleeve, bumped the micro-jump input by 2 decimal points. The Gilmore jumped. The Resolute and the Ardent, locked in formation, jumped with it. Standard protocol. Nobody questioned it for 4 seconds. Then the stars were wrong. Pell stared at the sensor feed. The constellations did not match any chart in the human database. The gravitational signature around them was dense, structured, artificial in places. Someone had built things out here. Big things. Dara got the alert in the middle of reading a maintenance report. She walked to the bridge without running, which was a habit she had developed over 11 years in deep space. Running scared the crew. She sat down, looked at the data Pell had pulled, and said nothing for a long moment. "How far in are we?" she asked. 40 light minutes past whatever that boundary line is, Pell said. He pointed to a faint energy signature on the long-range scan. "Those markers are not natural. They are spaced too evenly." "Someone's territory," said Akafer from the tactical seat. "Yes," Dara said. She opened a fleet-wide channel and told the Ardent and Gilmore to cut their drives and go to minimal emission. Then she told Rowe, down in engineering, to make the Resolute look as small and quiet as possible. Rowe did not ask why. He never did. He just started switching things off. For 18 minutes nothing happened. The 3 ships drifted. Pell tried to rebuild their position from stellar drift calculations. Akafer ran passive scans and did not like what she found. There were at least 9 large objects within sensor range, holding position. Not asteroids. The heat signatures were wrong for asteroids. Then the signal came. It hit all 3 ships at once, on every frequency simultaneously. The translation software took 4 minutes and 30 seconds to decode it, which Dara thought was impressive given they had never encountered this language before. When the translation finished, the message was 6 words long. "Power down, submit to boarding, now." Dara looked at it, then she looked at Akafer. "Those 9 objects," she said, "what are they?" "Warships," Akafer said. "Cruiser class based on mass, maybe bigger, weapons hot. They have had targeting locks on us since about 2 minutes after we arrived." Dara nodded slowly. She thought about the crew. 41 people on the Resolute, 28 on the Ardent, 19 on the Gilmore. Survey mission. No Marines. Light defensive systems designed to deflect micrometeorites, not warships. She thought about what a species that built boundary markers in deep space and responded to trespassers with warships probably expected to happen next. Then she opened a response channel. She did not power down. She did not submit. She said, in the calmest voice she had, that her fleet had entered this region by accident due to a navigational error, that she was happy to discuss the situation, and that she would need some time to consult her crew before taking any action. On the bridge of the Imperial cruiser Dominion's voice, Admiral Voss read the translated response and laughed. Not a warm laugh. The kind that people made when something was too stupid to be believed. 3 ships, said his communications officer. Primitive FTL signatures, no known registry. "They want to talk," said Voss. "Apparently." He looked at the formation around him. 12 cruisers. Enough firepower to reduce a small moon to gravel. He had deployed them the moment the border sensors triggered, not because he thought it necessary, but because he believed in demonstration. You showed primitive species what they were dealing with, and they surrendered, and that was the end of it. Ambassador Lyra, standing near the rear of the bridge where she had been trying to stay invisible, spoke up. "Admiral, they said it was an accident. We could." "We could what?" Voss said pleasantly. "Talk to them." "I intend to." He turned back to the screen. "Fire a warning volley, subsystems only. Let them feel the range." Lyra pressed her lips together and said nothing else. The volley launched. 12 precision energy bursts, dialed down to disabling yield, crossing the distance between the fleets in seconds. What happened next was something none of the compact's sensor operators had ever recorded before. The lead human ship did not absorb the impacts. It did not buckle. The shield layer around it shifted, bent, and redirected 3 of the bursts at angles that sent them spinning back across the formation. One of Voss's own flanking cruisers took a hit on its port engine housing. The bridge went silent. Voss stared at the sensor data. The human ships had not moved. They had not returned fire. They had not powered down. They were just sitting there, quiet, almost patient, while one of his own vessels vented atmosphere from a redirected shot. "What," said his tactical officer, "was that?" Nobody answered. On the Resolute, Rowe was already pulling up the shield data with both hands, grinning at the numbers like they were an old friend. "Passive deflection geometry," he said to nobody in particular. "We installed it to bounce debris. Turns out it works on energy weapons too." He paused. "Mostly." Dara was not grinning. She was watching the 12 warships and waiting to see what they did next. They did not talk. They regrouped, and then more ships began appearing on the long-range scan. Many more. The second thing Rowe noticed about the compact's weapons systems, after the frequency modulation, was that whoever designed them had never once considered the possibility of an enemy that enjoyed being shot at. Not enjoyed in any sane sense, but the Resolute shield data from the first volley had given Rowe 40 seconds of raw input from an alien energy weapon, and 40 seconds was more than enough for a man who had spent 6 years repairing deep space drilling rigs with whatever happened to be in his pockets. He had the frequency pattern mapped in 12 minutes. He had a countermeasure in 23. He told Dara. She told Akafor. Akafor said nothing for a moment and then asked how confident he was. He said 80%. She said that was the best number anyone had given her all day and went back to her screens. Outside, the compact was reorganizing. Voss had pulled the 12 cruisers into a tighter formation and was waiting for confirmation from the capital before escalating. This was not caution. This was procedure. You did not destroy alien vessels in unclaimed space, even primitive ones, without the Grand Consul's acknowledgement on record. It protected careers. Lyra used the waiting time to do something Voss had not authorized. She sent a direct hail to the human fleet. Not a demand. A question. She asked, in the compact's standard diplomatic frequency, whether the humans needed medical assistance or technical support following the navigational error. The response came back in under 2 minutes, translated through whatever system the humans were running. The voice was calm and female and said, "No injuries, no critical damage, and thank you for asking." Lyra stared at that translation for a long time. The confirmation from the capital came through 20 minutes later. Grand Consul Drath had reviewed the border alert, noted the ships were not in any registry, and authorized Admiral Voss to resolve the situation at his discretion. Voss read discretion as permission. He ordered a full engagement. 24 targeting solutions locked onto the 3 human ships simultaneously. The volley that followed was not a warning. It was designed to disable engines, crack hulls, and leave the crews alive for processing. A clean, professional, overwhelming application of force. The first problem was that 12 of the 24 shots hit nothing. Rowe's countermeasure broadcast a false positional echo on the same frequency the compact targeting systems used to anchor their locks. The shots that followed those echoes traveled through empty space and kept going. Of the 12 that tracked correctly, 8 deflected off the Resolute's repositioned shield geometry. 3 hit the Arden in the engine section and knocked out her primary drive, which was bad. 1 hit the Gilmore's sensor array, which was worse because it blinded their science vessel right when they needed data most. But the Resolute was untouched. Dara had watched Akafar's face during the engagement. Akafar had been completely still, which meant she was thinking hard. When the dust cleared, Akafar turned and said, "Their formation has a gap between the 4th and 7th cruiser on the starboard arc. It exists because their doctrine expects us to be trying to escape." "We are not escaping," Dara said. "No," Akafar said, "we are going through them." A survey ship accelerating directly into a cruiser formation was not something the Compact had tactical doctrine for. The manual did not cover it because no rational species did it. The cruiser captains in Voss's formation saw the Resolute spin up her drive and point directly at their lines, and spent 3 critical seconds waiting for the move to make sense. It did not make sense. It kept happening anyway. The Resolute hit the gap at full acceleration. Roe had dumped all available power to the forward shields, and the hull plating was running so hot the paint was blistering, but they were through. And at that range, inside the formation, the compact cruisers could not fire without hitting each other. Akafar fired twice, not energy weapons, kinetic, railgun slugs that humanity had been using since the first asteroid mining operations 2 centuries ago, dense metal moving at a fraction of light speed, dumb and brutal, and almost impossible to intercept at close range. The first took a cruiser's engine housing off entirely. The second punched through the bridge section of another vessel. 2 cruisers gone. The Resolute came out the other side of the formation and turned. On Voss's flagship, an officer said very quietly that the humans had just destroyed 2 of his cruisers with what appeared to be iron bars moving fast. Voss did not respond. He was watching the sensor feed where the Resolute had turned and was now holding position, weapons cold, waiting. Dara opened the channel again. She said the same thing she had said at the start. She was happy to discuss the situation. She would need a little time. Lyra, standing in the corner of the bridge, said, "Admiral, we should talk to them." This time Voss did not laugh. He was already composing the request for 40 ships. The Ardent was not dead. She was just slow and angry and leaking fuel from her number 2 port line, and her captain, a quiet man named Das, had spent the last 40 minutes doing the kind of creative engineering that deep space survey work demanded. He had rerouted propulsion through the secondary array, patched the fuel line with a composite sealant rated for 3 atmospheres of pressure being used on something that needed 7, and told his crew they were fine. They believed him because he said it the same way he said everything, which was like it was already handled. The Gilmore had lost her main sensors, but her captain, an older woman named Faye, had 3 junior scientists hot patching the secondary array from a parts cabinet that was technically only supposed to contain coffee filters and printer stock. She did not question why the parts were there. Survey crews put useful things in every cabinet they could reach. Dara got status reports from both ships and marked them operational. Then she looked at the long-range scan. 40 ships. 2 of them so massive her sensors struggled to determine where they ended. Dreadnoughts. She had read about compact dreadnoughts in the intelligence briefings Earth sent out to survey crews, the ones written in language designed to make officers feel informed without making them feel afraid. The language had not worked. She remembered being afraid when she read them. She was not afraid now. There was no room for it. Fear needed space in the brain, and her brain was entirely full of calculations. She called a command meeting across all 3 ships. Video only, no lag delay short. She told them what was coming. Nobody on the call made the noise people made in stories when the odds were impossible. They made the noise engineers made when a problem got harder, which was a kind of exhale and a slight change in posture, and then focus. Roe spoke first. He said the Gilmore's research probes could be reprogrammed as proximity detonators in about 90 minutes. Faye said she could spare 8 of them. Roe said 8 was enough to make the approach corridor extremely uncomfortable for anything that used active targeting sensors. because the electromagnetic burst from a proximity detonation at close range would force a targeting system to reboot, and a targeting system rebooting took between 4 and 9 seconds depending on the ship class. Pell spoke next. He had been studying the long-range scan, and he said there was something on the edge of their sensor range that the compact ships were giving a wide berth to. A debris field. Old. Very old. The mass signatures suggested it was the remains of a battle maybe hundreds of years ago. He said the field was dense enough to block most active sensor types. He said he could get all 3 ships into it, even the Ardent if they moved now and slow. Dara looked at the scan. The compact fleet was holding at distance, still organizing. 40 ships took time to deploy, even for a professional military. They had maybe 90 minutes before the formation was ready to advance. "How confident are you on the debris field navigation?" she asked Pell. "Very confident on getting in," he said. "Less confident on what it looks like inside." "Good enough," she said. What she did not tell the command meeting, because it was not useful information for them to have, was that the debris field appeared on none of the human charts. It was old enough that whatever battle had made it predated any human contact with this region. That meant the compact knew what it was. That meant the compact would not fire carelessly into it if there was a reason not to. She sent a private note to Akafar asking if the compact had any species with sacred sites in this sector. Akafar came back in 6 minutes with pulled data from the pre-mission intelligence pack. Yes, the Surin, a member species of the compact, considered debris fields from the founding wars to be ceremonial ground, untouchable. Even compact military vessels were prohibited from weapons discharge within the field boundaries. Dara read it twice, then she told Pell to start moving. In the compact capital, Grand Consul Drath was receiving a report from Ambassador Lyra that he read 3 times and did not enjoy once. Lyra was not known for exaggeration. She was known for cold precision, which was why she was assigned to military oversight postings. Her report said the humans had survived an overwhelming first engagement not through technology, but through improvisation and a complete psychological resistance to the concept of yielding. She wrote that the humans fought as though the outcome was always uncertain, no matter the odds, which meant they never stopped trying to change it. Drath set the report down and looked at his window. The compact had not fought a war in 60 years, not a real one. Smaller species saw the fleet, measured the numbers, and surrendered before the first shot. The machinery of compact dominance ran on the assumption that all rational beings made rational calculations when faced with superior force. He was beginning to wonder if humans were rational in the same way. He sent a quiet message to the Intelligence Directorate asking for everything they had on human history, combat history specifically. The file that came back was 600 years long and contained more active warfare than the entire recorded history of the compact combined. Drath sat with that for a while. Outside, the 40 ships were almost in formation. On 3 small human vessels, 8 probes were being stripped apart and rebuilt by people who had never built a weapon before and were doing it anyway. The debris field smelled wrong, according to the Gilmore's atmospheric sensors, which was impossible because there was no atmosphere in space. But the readings kept flagging something in the residual particle density that the software labeled organic compounds, ancient and compressed and cold. Faye's science team noted it in the log and kept working. There was no time to be curious yet. Inside the field, visibility on active sensors dropped to almost nothing. The hulks of ancient warships, some of them larger than anything currently in either fleet, drifted in slow rotation around a center mass that had once been something enormous and was now a compressed ball of fused metal the size of a small island. The 3 human ships moved through the debris using passive sensors and Pell's calculations, cold thrusting in short bursts, lights off, running minimal power. From outside they vanished. Voss's 40 ships held formation at the field boundary. His sensor operators reported a complete loss of contact. His tactical officers explained that active sensors returned nothing useful in a field that dense. His formation was arranged to prevent any exit. But the field had 17 possible exit vectors, and covering all of them thinly meant covering none of them well. He ordered passive monitoring and waited. Inside, the humans were not waiting. Rowe had finished the probe conversions and was already moving on to his next idea, which he had not told anyone about yet because it was not fully thought through. The Resolute's FTL coils, when charging, produced a low-level magnetic pulse that was normally a navigation hazard to be shielded against. Rowe started thinking about what happened if you removed the shielding and aimed the coils. Not at FTL power. Just enough charge to produce a burst on the exact frequency that the compact's shield cycling systems used to synchronize their layers. A shield cycling out of sync dropped to about 30% efficiency for 2 to 4 seconds while it resynchronized. That was a long time in combat. He told Dara. She looked at it. She asked how many times they could do it before the coils burned out. He said 4, maybe 5 if they were gentle. She said all right. Akafor was doing something else entirely. She had been watching the passive sensor data from the formation outside and tracking the patrol movements of the dreadnoughts specifically. Large ships moved predictably. They had to. The physics of their size demanded it. Every turn was slow. Every position changed telegraphed minutes in advance. She built a map of their patrol timing in her head and then on paper and then on the tactical screen, and she found what she was looking for. A window. Every 19 minutes, the two dreadnoughts were briefly oriented so that their combined fire arcs did not overlap on the same 3 exit vectors. 19 minutes was not much, but it was something. She sent the first probe out through a gap in the debris on the eastern vector. It drifted on cold thrusters, no drive, no emissions, into the space between the field boundary and the nearest cluster of compact cruisers. When it detonated, the electromagnetic burst hit 5 ships simultaneously and forced their targeting systems into reboot cycles. The Resolute moved before the burst had even finished, sliding out of the field on the northern vector at half drive, firing as she came. Not at the cruisers with rebooting systems. At a different one, fully operational, whose captain was turning to look at the explosion and had presented his aft quarter. The railgun slug removed the aft quarter. The Resolute was back inside the field in 11 seconds. The compact captains outside spent 4 minutes trying to decide what had just happened and where the shot had come from. Their formation had not moved optimally because 3 of their number were still clearing targeting resets. It happened again 7 minutes later from a different vector. A probe, a burst, a shot, gone. This time the railgun hit a cruiser's engine housing rather than destroying the ship outright, and the cruiser drifted out of formation trailing heat, which forced the ships on either side to adjust position to maintain spacing, which opened a gap that had not been there before. Akafor noted the gap. Voss was past Fury. He had reached the cold, flat place on the other side of Fury, where things became very clear and very simple. He had lost 9 ships to 3 opponents hiding in a debris field using weapons that a mining operation would recognize. He had a choice between 2 options that both humiliated him. He could wait, which accomplished nothing, or he could order saturation fire into the debris field, which would be effective and would also destroy Surin's sacred ground and create a political catastrophe that would follow him for the rest of his career. He chose the fire. His tactical officers entered the order with the expressions of people who had decided that following a bad command was better than arguing with it. 40 ships opened up on the debris field simultaneously. The ancient hulks shattered and burned, and the compressed center mass cracked along a fault line that had probably been there for 100 years. The field lit up like a small star for 40 seconds. When the light died, the sensors cleared slowly. 2 human ships were visible, drifting, damaged, dark. The Ardent had her hull breached on the port side. The Gilmore was completely without power. The Resolute was not there. Not destroyed, not drifting, not hiding, not anywhere in the field. Gone. Lyra, watching the sensor feeds in silence, felt something that she did not have an immediate word for. She found it later, searching through old compact linguistic archives. The word was dread. It was considered archaic. No one in the compact had needed it professionally in 60 years. Pell had planned the jump while the saturation bombardment was still happening. He had watched the 40-ship formation on passive sensors and done what he did when problems were too large to solve from the front. He looked for where the problem was not looking. The dreadnoughts were facing the debris field. Their rear sensor arrays, designed to monitor friendly fleet traffic, were running at reduced power because all processing capacity was allocated to the attack. Their aft quarters, where drive sections and command bridges were housed, were pointing away from everything they considered a threat. He gave Dara the numbers. She looked at them for 5 seconds. She asked if the margin of error put them inside the dreadnought's hull or outside it. He said outside. She asked how far outside. He said between 40 and 80 meters. She said that was fine and told Rowe to spin up the FTL coils. Rowe said spinning up the coils for a jump inside a debris field while under saturation bombardment was not recommended procedure. Dara said she knew that. Rowe said all right and started the sequence. The jump took the Resolute 11 light seconds away in under a blink, repositioning them directly behind Voss's flagship at a range close enough that the dreadnought filled every forward camera. 40 meters. Pell had been optimistic. It was closer to 25. Nobody on the Resolute breathed for a moment. Then Rowe exhaled and said quietly that the coils were done. They would not jump again. Dara nodded and opened the channel. Voss's bridge received the hail, and every officer on it reached for a weapon console before the translation came through, which was a natural reaction to a human survey ship appearing 25 meters off their aft quarter without warning. Then the translation finished, and the reaction became something more complicated. The voice on the channel was the same one from the beginning, still calm. The woman said she had a targeting solution on the dreadnought's command section. She said her crew was ready to fire. She said she had no desire to do so, and that she was raising this possibility not as a threat but as information relevant to the conversation she would now like to have. She said she was still happy to discuss the situation. Voss looked at his tactical display. The Resolute was inside his own fleet's firing perimeter. Any shot at the human ship that missed would hit his own vessels. Any shot that hit the human ship might penetrate through and hit his own vessels. His formation was arranged to destroy enemies in front of it. Nobody in compact military doctrine had ever seriously considered the problem of an enemy that teleported behind you. He said nothing. Lyra stepped forward. She did not ask permission. She pressed the transmit key herself and said, "This is Ambassador Lyra. I am the diplomatic representative aboard this fleet. I am ready to begin formal discussions." The response was immediate. "Good," the human voice said. "I was hoping you were still there." What followed was not a negotiation in any sense Lyra had experienced before. There was no position staking, no demand inflation, no calculated silence to force concessions. The human woman stated what had happened with complete factual accuracy, including the parts that were embarrassing to the compact, without apparent satisfaction. She stated what she wanted. She waited. She wanted safe exit from compact space for all 3 vessels and their crews. She wanted acknowledgement in writing that the incursion was accidental, and that the compact had initiated hostilities without cause. She wanted the Ardent and Gilmore crews recovered and transported safely to the border. No territory, no compensation, no punishment of compact personnel, no public announcement. Lyra worked through the list twice to make sure she had not missed anything. She said, carefully, that those terms were achievable and that she would need to contact the Grand Consul for authorization. The human said that was fine and that she would wait. In the capital, Drath received Lyra's transmission alongside the battle logs from the engagement. He read them in order. He watched the sensor footage of the Resolute disappearing from the debris field and reappearing behind his flagship. He watched one survey vessel, with no Marines and no dedicated weapons systems, pin his entire war fleet in place through positioning alone. He thought about what Lyra had written in her earlier report, that humans treated every situation as uncertain until it was finished, that they did not stop. He thought about the 600-year combat history his intelligence office had sent him. He thought about a species that had spent most of its history at war with itself, which meant it had been practicing constantly, refining constantly, building a collective knowledge of conflict that ran so deep it was almost instinct. He thought about what happened in 5 years when humanity built ships for the purpose. He approved the terms. Voss received the authorization and read it without expression. He passed it to his communications officer and told him to transmit the acknowledgement. He did not watch the screen when it went. He stood at the viewport instead and looked at the 25-meter gap between his ship and the human vessel, and thought about how the last 10 days had produced more complete failure than his previous 30 years of service combined. He removed his rank insignia and put it in his pocket, not a gesture anyone saw, just something he needed to do. Lyra sent the formal acknowledgement to the Resolute. The human response took about 40 seconds, which Lyra suspected was the time needed to tell the crew, because there was a faint sound in the background of the confirmation message that she eventually identified as people applauding somewhere off mic. She found that unreasonably affecting. She did not say so to anyone. The Ardent was towed to the border by a compact support vessel whose crew refused to make eye contact with any human for the entire journey. This was not hostility. It was something closer to the specific discomfort of being asked to escort home the people who had just beaten your fleet and not knowing the protocol for it, because the protocol had never been written. Das, the Ardent's captain, offered the compact crew coffee at one point through the airlock intercom. There was a long pause and then a very careful yes. A sealed container was passed across. The compact crew analyzed it before drinking it, which was sensible, and then drank all of it, which told Das something he filed away as useful. The Gilmore was in worse shape. Phase engineers had restored minimal power, but the hull had 3 stress fractures that needed dry dock, and the sensor array was completely gone. Faye spent the transit writing the most detailed after-action scientific report anyone had ever filed about being in a combat zone. She included atmospheric readings, gravitational anomalies from the weapon's discharge, and the organic compound data from the debris field. She sent it to Earth with a note that said someone should probably look into that last part when there was time. The Resolute escorted both ships to the border under her own power, which she should not technically have been able to do given the state of her hull plating and the fact that her FTL coils were fused. Rowe had found a way. He always found a way. He had been doing something complicated with the secondary drive manifold for 30 hours, and when Dara asked him how confident he was, he said 60%, and she had accepted that because 60% from Rowe was equivalent to 95% from anyone else. They crossed the border on a Thursday, ship time. Nobody met them. Earth did not know they were coming because the Resolute's long-range communications array had been damaged in the first engagement, and they had been running silent since. The first contact Earth received from the fleet was a standard arrival ping from Pell's navigation system when they dropped out of FTL in familiar space. Then the reports went up the chain, and things got considerably less quiet. Inside compact space, the fallout moved at the speed of politics, which is faster than light but slower than anyone wanted. Voss was removed from active command within 2 weeks through a process described publicly as a routine rotation and privately as something else entirely. The official record of the engagement was classified at the highest level, which meant approximately 400 people read it immediately. Two of the smaller compact member states, the Surin and a species called the Fen who had never liked the Dreadnought program anyway, began separate and quiet inquiries into whether their treaty obligations with the compact required them to participate in future conflicts or merely to not oppose them. This was a legal distinction that their treaty lawyers had apparently been waiting to raise for years. Grand Consul Drath established the Human Studies Division in the Intelligence Directorate. He appointed Lyra to run it. She accepted without comment and immediately requested all available human broadcast data, literature, historical records, and anything else the Compact's long-range sensors had passively collected from human space over the past 20 years. The collection was large. Humans broadcast constantly. They had been filling their corner of space with signals for 2 centuries: news, entertainment, science, art, arguments, sports, music, stories, jokes, disasters, recoveries. Lyra's team worked through it for months. The thing that struck them first was the disasters. Humanity had experienced extinction-level threats multiple times and recovered. Plagues, famines, wars, environmental catastrophes. Each time the records showed a period of collapse followed by something that Lyra's linguistic analyst, a careful and precise person named Tor, struggled to translate accurately. The closest compact word was rebuilding. But that was not quite right. It was more specific than that. It was rebuilding with the explicit intention of making the thing stronger than it had been before the disaster. Tor flagged this to Lyra. She read the notation and sat with it for a long time. She thought about the Resolute with its burned paint and fused coils and cracked hull plating, jumping to 25 meters off a dreadnought's aft quarter, opening a channel, and asking to talk. She wrote a second report for Drath. It was longer than the first, and it contained a recommendation that the Compact open formal diplomatic contact with humanity as soon as possible, before humanity decided to do it themselves, because a species that responded to disaster by becoming more resilient was going to be very different in 10 years than it was today, and the Compact should know them now, while they were still learning. Drath approved the recommendation. Lyra sent the initial diplomatic contact through official channels on a standard frequency. The response from Earth's Foreign Ministry came back in 6 hours, which she was told was considered quite fast for an interstellar communication of that formality. The response was warm and professional and expressed genuine interest in opening a dialogue. At the end, in what she was told was a human professional custom, the Foreign Ministry officer had added a short personal note. It said that Earth had heard a little about the incident in the border region and hoped no lasting harm had come to anyone. It said humans were always sorry when things escalated. Lyra read it twice, then she called Tor in and showed it to him. "Are they serious?" Tor asked. "I think so," Lyra said. Tor thought about it. He thought about 600 years of war records and 8 probes converted into weapons in 90 minutes, and a ship appearing from nowhere to hold a dreadnought at gunpoint, and then asking to talk. "They are very strange," he said. "Yes," Lyra said. "Try to remember that about them. It is the most important thing.